Let me talk about this. I'm writing a column right now about being willing to admit when you're wrong on something. And I was wrong on something 10 or 12 years ago in retrospect, and I've talked about it. I was wrong in that I was willing to report on and cover improper benefit stories early in my media career. That is, when writers would come out and they would say, oh, this guy got paid X amount of dollars. Oh, this guy got a car. Oh, his family got a house. I reported on those and wrote about them. In retrospect, and I've said this before, but I think it's important. In retrospect, I was wrong. I got that one wrong. And about a decade ago or so, I started to speak out against any restrictions on college athletes being able to be compensated. And there were some stories that were finally, I just said, this is wrong. Todd Gurley got suspended for selling his jersey from a bowl game and his cleats. Johnny Manziel got suspended for doing autographs. People tried to come after Jameis Winston, all these things. And I just said, you know what? This is wrong. You should be able to make money off of your signature. You should be able to sell your products. And I started saying it on all my shows. And now that's basically where we are. Players can be paid. But over July 4th, I didn't have a conversation with them. I try to give their people space. But Cam Newton was at the same July 4th celebration that I was at in Alice Beach, down on the Florida Panhandle. And I want to give Cam Newton credit here. He was sitting in a lounge chair surrounded by thousands of people, not asking for preferential treatment at all, just hanging out with his family. I don't know Cam Newton personally, don't have any relationship with him at all. Again, I try not to go up to people and bother them. I'm happy to shake hands, pose for photos with you guys, but I don't know. He's with his family. I don't want to bother him. All of us got the Cam Newton story wrong. And what I mean by that is, in that era, at that point in time, Cam Newton taking cash was a violation of rules, and it was a huge story. In retrospect, Cam Newton did nothing wrong. If Auburn paid Cam Newton $180,000, it was the greatest $180,000 that has ever been paid in the history of college athletics. And oh, by the way, just about everybody was getting paid. Under the table, hidden. Cam took a lot of slings and arrows for something that everybody else was doing. The way that I covered Cam was wrong in retrospect, because a couple of years later, I came to the conclusion, you know what, I got this wrong. The reason why I bring that up, admitting that you were wrong is not, in my opinion, a sign that you are an awful human being. I think if you are every day not challenging yourself to examine why you believe what you believe and whether it is consistent, logical, and principled to believe so, then I think you are in danger of making poor, irrational, illogical decisions. We have created a world where people are terrified of saying that they are wrong. I'll give you an example of several things that I have gotten wrong, not 15 years ago, but recently. I didn't think Caitlin Clark was going to be as popular as she is. I did not think that she would bring the audience that she has to the WNBA. I was wrong. I did not think that back in the day in early COVID, I trusted the numbers that China was putting out initially in March and April of 2020. I was wrong to have done so. I erred. I've talked about this a lot over the years. People say, what do you get wrong? I'm giving you several examples. It looks like I'm going to be wrong about the NBA getting paid a massive amount of money that I don't think economically is justified because their ratings have collapsed, but because the streamers and the television networks are so desperate to try to avoid losing, I was wrong, it appears, about the money that they're going to get. I was wrong about the red wave 2022. We got it in New York and we got it in Florida, and that is why Republicans took control of the House. But only one statewide incumbent lost, Sisolak, the governor of Nevada. I believe that there would be far more incumbents to lose their jobs and get fired, and I thought Republicans would take back control of the Senate. I was wrong. There's a lot of things. Look, I did a daily gambling show. I was wrong on a lot of my gambling picks. You don't have to be perfect. Pretending that you are actually hurts your audience. My decision in 2016 to vote for president, in retrospect, I believe I was wrong. I should have voted for Donald Trump. I voted for Gary Johnson instead. I regret that choice that I made. I screw up all the time. You all screw up all the time too. To err is human. We are all imperfect. The reason why I bring this up is, guess what? You don't have to be perfect all the time. You just have to get a couple of things right in your life, and you're going to do pretty well. I'm talking about your professional life, not your personal life, although that to a large extent is true too. Picking the right spouse is far more important than where you go to college or where you buy your first house or where you take your first job. That's a reality. I don't know that a lot of people tell you that. But also, being right on really big issues can help to handle being wrong on a lot of small issues. I just laid out a ton of things that I think I got wrong, that I think I screwed up. And there are a lot of them. Guess what I got right? Founding OutKick. Getting involved in a big way in sports gambling. Think about this, because I think people need to think more about their life as if it is private equity. When you are right on the right things, you don't just hit a grand slam, you score 1,000 runs. So swinging and missing, I lost $50,000 when I didn't have $50,000 to spend on sports gambling. On pants, colored pants that I thought was a gold mine. I lost money investing a couple $100,000 investing in a company that was a Cameo competitor that didn't work. I'm going to lose money on things all the time for the rest of my life. I got parts of a ton of different companies right now. Some of them are going to be home runs, others are not. I hit 1,000 home runs, 10,000 home runs on OutKick and on sports gambling. And those were such massive successes that they covered up all of my screw-ups on a professional level. You don't have to be perfect. You can't succeed, I don't think, unless you learn from your screw-ups and figure out why you got the things wrong that you did. They say that the average person peaks in terms of their overall performance, on average, at 57 years old. Why is that? It's not because your brain is faster or better at recalling everything at 57 years old. You all know this. When you're in your 20s and 30s, your brain flashes faster. But by the time you get to 57, you've had your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, and your early 50s to learn, and you can start to think more intelligently. So I think I've got, hopefully, 12 more years of getting better at what I do without necessarily being faster at what I do. The reason why I say that is we have to re-examine the way we talk about screwing up. Venture capital guys get it. You can't really succeed unless you're willing to analyze what you got wrong. Most people want to look out there and say, oh, that wasn't my fault. Somebody else caused me to get that wrong. That's not the way you have to think if you're going to be super successful in life. You have to think, I screwed that up. What could I have done better? The reason why I want to bring this up is because we have in America today, it seems to me, in much of public life, a refusal to acknowledge screwing things up. Why will people still not admit that shutting down schools was a disaster? That claiming Joe Biden didn't have mental and physical health related issues was not a cheap fake. It was actually the truth. And anybody arguing with you on the other side was actually engaging in misinformation and disinformation. I think because people are so afraid of admitting that they're wrong. And worse than admitting you're wrong is sometimes having to admit that other people are right. I've got a whole column written. I'm going to finish it at some point, I hope tonight, although it's my wife's birthday. I've got to run around. I got a bunch of stuff going on. My thesis is, why have all of these stories been proven to be debunked? It's because the wrong people were right. The wrong people were right. Think about that phrase. Where were you wrong? Why were you wrong? What did you learn from it? How can it make you better? Don't be of the opinion that you've never gotten anything wrong. Own it. Own your failures and build on them to something better. That, to me, is actually the way I wish our politicians, I wish our media leaders, I wish more people. And by the way, it also works. Nobody is angry at you for admitting you're wrong. I don't mean apologize, right? Generally speaking. I mean, look at arguments and say, boy, you know what? I didn't analyze that data right. I got that wrong. What you will find is that your audience trusts you more, if you're in my business, when you admit when you're wrong. They trust you more. It means that your attacks have no effect at all. People try to do hit pieces on me all the time. You know what the top results are every time? Yeah, we know. Yeah, he's talked about that. People come after me all the time. Hey, did you know Clay Travis voted for Obama? Yeah. He's written actually several books about it. He talks about it. Hey, did you know Clay Travis said? Yeah, we know. He's talked about it. I don't hide. I'm going to tell you what I think. I'm going to give you my best take on things. Sometimes I'm going to be wrong. And when I am, I own it. I probably wrote 3,000-4,000 words looking at how did the mainstream media, Washington Post, New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, MSNBC, CNN, how did they get everything wrong on COVID? And how have they followed it up with everything wrong on the Hunter Biden laptop and now everything wrong on the Joe Biden health situation? And I think it's fascinating. My thesis in that piece is that the wrong people were right. And I use as an analogy in there from the COVID era. Imagine that you had to choose to either follow the guidance of your average clerk, cashier, working at a Dollar General store in a small town in a red state in America, or you had to follow the guidance of a New York Times reporter living in New York City. Who handled COVID better? I would submit to you that the Dollar General clerk had a more rational, realistic, reasonable response to COVID than what was going on with the New York Times. I would also submit to you that the average working person out there had a better sense of what was going on with Joe Biden than a New York Times reporter did, at least based on their public profile. Why did that happen? The analogy I end with is this. Left-wing media is broken, but it isn't impossible to fix. It's just that there isn't a desire to fix it at all. And I use as an analogy airplanes. I just finished a big oral history book of 9/11. I think it's called All the Planes in the Sky. I don't have the book beside me right now, but it's basically an oral history of that entire 9/11 era, meaning the few days before, everything that happened, the Pentagon attack, the two trade centers, Shanksville, Pennsylvania, all of that. It's a great read. It's now been 20 some odd years. College kids today are graduating who were born after 9/11. It might as well be the Vietnam War to them. And so I'm reading about it, and what I just kept coming back to is every time there is a plane crash, whether it's caused by terrorists, whether it's caused by someone else, they go and they do a deep investigation. They go get the black box, and they figure out what went wrong on the airplane. There isn't a lot of sitting around and pointing fingers. There is an understanding that airplane travel is dangerous and that a lot of things can go wrong with an airplane. And that whenever something does go wrong with an airplane, we should go back and basically figure out what caused that plane to crash and make sure that we take into position all of the best practices and learn from why that airplane went down. This is one of, I would say, the best things that we do in America. In my lifetime, flying in an airplane has gotten drastically safer. When I was a kid in the 1980s, airplanes went down far more frequently than they go down now in the 2020s. Air travel itself, in the 2 generations that I've been alive, has gone from safe to almost completely safe. That's because when we have errors, we figure out what went wrong and we try to address it. Why doesn't the same thing happen in media? If I ran the Washington Post, and after Donald Trump got elected in 2016, we put at the top of the newspaper, "Democracy dies in darkness." And then we had gotten Russia collusion wrong. We had gotten the Steele dossier wrong. We'd gotten the Mueller report and what we expected it to say wrong. We got the Hunter Biden laptop wrong. We got everything related to COVID wrong. And by the way, you could say this for the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or MSNBC. But I'm just using this as an example because Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. Got everything COVID wrong. And then it also turned out we got everything relating to Joe Biden's actual mental and physical health wrong. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. It wouldn't have taken all of those things being wrong for me to have trouble sleeping. I would have said, this is unacceptable. Now, I ran OutKick until 2021. OutKick has gotten really big. I saw recently some data that of quote-unquote conservative websites on the internet, foxnews.com is number 1, and I think OutKick was number 3 in terms of total audience, described as conservative. Now, maybe we're like 4, Wall Street Journal, New York Post. We were like OutKick is now like the number 4 biggest conservative outlet in the entire country. We're one of the 10 biggest sports sites, however you want to classify. We're big, okay? If we had gotten the things wrong that the Washington Post had gotten wrong, when I founded and owned OutKick, I would have been unable to sleep at night. By the way, it's been about 13 years ago that I founded OutKick. I founded OutKick in the summer of 2011 at SEC Media Days. So OutKick is about 13 years old. I wouldn't have been able to sleep. I don't know how Jeff Bezos sleeps, given how much he's gotten wrong with the Washington Post. But if we had gotten all that wrong, why not do a deep dive on how we came to get all of those stories wrong if we actually cared about getting them right and putting in place new processes to allow things that we got wrong to not be the same error anymore? Wouldn't that be a rational way that you would respond using, arguably, the most successful example ever, that is airplanes, as a way to go look and say, hey, how did we miss on COVID? How do we get masks wrong? How do we get social distancing wrong? How do we get shutting down schools wrong? How do we get essential and non-essential businesses wrong? How do we get COVID shot mandates wrong? How did we get what the COVID shot was going to do wrong? How did we get the Hunter Biden laptop story wrong? How did we miss on Joe Biden's health? If you get every major story wrong, And I mean on a factual basis. I don't mean just like, hey, somebody has the opinion that this should happen and that opinion ends up looking ridiculous. I mean actually get your reporting wrong. Wouldn't you want to dive in and actually do a deep dive to address that and solve it once and for all? I would. And I don't understand why that has still not happened.